Good morning, everybody. My name is Rebecca Geller. I'm going to wait just about 1 minute. I think people are just joining us. I just hit the launch button. So if you have joined us, we're going to wait about maybe 30 more seconds because I see the numbers increasing very quickly and I don't want to start before people are in. So give us about 1 minute.
And Rebecca, my apartment is right next to a railroad track, and every now and then a train goes by and it gets really loud. If so, I'll try to mute myself for 30 seconds or so.
No problem. I think I know probably where you are. I grew up in Richmond, so I'm a Richmond native.
Right across from the train museum.
Okay.
By Mayo Bridge.
Yep. I grew up on the West End, but I know Richmond quite well. Abby Spamberger's husband and I grew up together. We were in the same class forever.
It's a big state, but in some ways it's a small one.
Right? Absolutely. I babysat for Tim Kaine's kids when I was in high school. All right, so we have 37 attendees. I know a couple people will join us, but I'll go ahead and start. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rebecca Geller. I serve on the board for the DemBiz Council. I'm also a business owner myself. I am the president and CEO of the Geller Law Group, which is a law firm in Northern Virginia comprised of 26 women. We do small business, wills and trusts, and family law. And it is my honor this morning to host our program. This morning, we will start the first 30 minutes we will be with Attorney General Mark Herring. And then at 10 o'clock, we will switch over to Delegate Jay Jones, who is also running in the Democratic primary. The purpose of this conversation today, we are not going to get into the weeds about policy. We're going to get to know who our candidates are as individuals. What makes you you? What makes you tick? So this morning we started with Attorney General Mark Herring, and I'm going to give a very brief background. I think most people know who he is. So Mark Herring is from the Leesburg area. He served as state senator until 2013, when he was first elected as Attorney General. He was reelected again in 2017 and is running for his third term now in 2021. Attorney General, welcome. We're excited to have you. My first question is really, what made you decide to first get into politics? Was there a turning point in your life that made you think you wanted to run for office? Was it something you always thought about? What made you decide you wanted to go into politics?
Well, Rebecca, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be back in front of the group. It's a group that many of you I've known for a long time, but there are probably some that this is our first introduction, and it's also nice to reintroduce ourselves. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation. And no, this is not something that I had thought I would ever do growing up, even going through law school and after. And so what got me involved in public service was, so I grew up in Loudoun County, and my family had some ups and downs. My parents separated and divorced when I was young. I was raised by a single mom. And one of the things that she really instilled in me as I was growing up is if you see a problem in your community, you've got a responsibility to do something about it. If you see something wrong that's happening around you, don't look the other way. Don't wait for somebody else. You've got a responsibility to try to do something about it and fix it. And so I'd grown up in Loudoun. My wife, Laura, and I met when I was just about to start law school. We got married in between second and third year of law school. And I really wanted to come back to my hometown, set up my law practice there and raise a family. And she was game for that. So that's what we did. And that was in 1990. And about 7 or 8 years later, we had 2 young children, and they were about to start school. And just about the time they were starting school, the schools were way overcrowded all around the county. As we all know, in Northern Virginia, Loudoun at that time still, but especially then, was growing at like 10, 12% a year after year. And the student population was growing even faster. And the board of supervisors at the time just wasn't building schools very quickly. And I remember thinking, well, this isn't right. Somebody's got to do something about it. And, I remembered the lessons that my mom had taught me, which is, okay, there's a problem. You've got a responsibility to do something about it. And so I thought, okay, well, how can I fix this problem? And I thought, well, if I can get elected to the Board of Supervisors and get 4 others to go along with me in making school construction and relieving school overcrowding a priority, we can fix this problem. And that's what I did. And to everyone's shock and surprise, I won. In 1999, we made school construction a priority and overhauling the county's comprehensive plan to better manage growth. And we built or funded 16 new schools in those 4 years. And so that's how I got started. And the job that I have right now as Attorney General is by far the best job I've ever had in my whole life, probably ever will. And the thing I like most about it, I love practicing law. I love public policy, but most of all, I love helping people. And when you're the Attorney General, you get to do all 3 of those things every minute you're awake. But I can also say, having said that, serving my community as a county supervisor was also one of the most rewarding and fulfilling experiences of my life. It was just great to be able to serve the community in that way. And I felt like I knew every blade of grass in the Leesburg district. If somebody's basement flooded, I knew it in 10 minutes. So that's how I got involved in public service.
So going back to earlier in your life, what were some of the jobs you had when you were, before law school, and what did you learn from them? How did those influence who you are now?
Oh my goodness. Well, all right. So I mentioned that I was raised by a single mom. We lived in Loudoun County. At the time, the houses were pretty far apart. It was still fairly rural back then in the 1970s. And so my first job, and this was my first entrepreneurial venture, was selling eggs to the neighbors. And I got 3 dozen hens, and I would walk, down the road. And again, the houses were pretty far apart. And, I still look back, it's a good thing. There's a reason that I went into law and not marketing. I would knock on the door and say, "Oh, would you be interested in buying a dozen eggs? These are farm fresh." And then the person at the door would go, "Well, how much?" And I'd say, "Oh, $1.05." And they'd say, "Well, why should I pay you $1.05 instead of going to Giant and getting them for 95 cents?" And I was like, and instead of thinking, all right, these are farm fresh, look how big they are, I'm bringing them to your door, I was like, okay, 95 cents, so marketing was not my forte. That was my first entrepreneurial venture. But my first job out of high school, and this job really did teach me a lot. My first job out of high school was working construction. And together with Pell Grants, government loans, construction jobs, I worked my way through college. My second summer, I worked my way up to running a jackhammer, 135-pound jackhammer on top of Occoquan Dam for 58 hours a week in the hot Virginia sun. And let me tell you, that builds both muscles and character. But it taught me a lot. And a couple of things that I'll never forget about that experience. There was a time, about after a week, all of us on that crew, there were about 5 of us. We're like, when you wake up in the morning, are your ears ringing? And we're like, yeah, because we had no lung protection, we had no ear protection, and the jackhammers were really loud and created a lot of concrete dust. And so we asked management, could we have some ear protection and something to protect us from what we're breathing in? And they said no, they didn't want to pay the cost. There was a guy who had been a member of a union, and he told his union friends about it, and then they provided us with the ear protection. And it's just like little foam cores. You could get a box of them, 1,000 for $10 or something. And it taught me a lot. The whole experience taught me about the importance of looking out for one another. It also taught me, and the people on the crew, I was going to college, so it wasn't like I was going to do that the rest of my life. I think there's one other college student doing it, but the others ranged from 35 to 55. And it just taught me a lot about how all workers should be treated fairly and paid fairly for their labor. It taught me the pride of actual building things and construction. And it taught me that everyone has hopes and dreams for themselves and for their families, and everyone deserves to have the best education possible for their kids, and access to quality, affordable health care. And so those life lessons I carry with me today.
I love that egg story. I have not heard that egg story before about you. And
Well, and something else, had my mother not subsidized the feed, I would have lost my shirt. So again, there's a reason why I went into law.
it reminds me, my 11-year-old this summer was riding his bike, and a neighbor had a snake in her garage, and she asked him to get the snake out of her garage for her. And so he did that, and then came home and said, I really want to start a business removing snakes from garages. And I am the mean mom who nixed that idea. So I'm clearly getting in the way of his entrepreneurial future. So thinking again about, your formative years, whether as a kid or as an adult, have there been people who were mentors to you and had influences on your life? And can you talk about them?
Oh, well, we all have them. And I'll go back to my mom. She was a huge influence on my life. So much of the time growing up, we had each other. And some things that she taught me actually were very informative about my approach to the law and my philosophy about law, and in a way, the approach that I bring to the job. She had a little family background, just set the stage for this. So she grew up in Memphis. My grandfather, her dad, was a Presbyterian minister. And she just wanted to break out. That was probably in the 30s, 40s. She just wanted to get out and see the world, see the country. And so the way she figured out how to do that was to become a flight attendant. And she was accepted into the flight school for an airline. She went, and she loved that job. And growing up, she would just tell this to me over and over. She said it was the best job. She saw these different cities, and she could recite the names of the airports on the routes that she flew on. And at a certain point, and this was probably the mid-50s, she met my dad, and at a certain point, they decided to get married, and she was forced to quit her job because the airline at the time, similar to other airlines, had a no marriage rule. Women could not be married and be flight attendants. And she just thought that was so wrong. And it was a job she loved. She loved that job. About 25 years later, there was a class action lawsuit in the late 70s. And ultimately, she was offered her job back. And her two children at the time urged her to take that offer. She didn't. But it meant so much to her to just know that there was that wrong had been made right. And I kind of feel like the passion that I have to use the law as a tool to right wrongs is something that started at that young age, from seeing that experience with my mom, how she was discriminated against because of her gender, how it made her feel, and how it made her feel so much better when, even though she didn't take the job offer, she felt like her rights had been vindicated. And that's so much of the approach that I have brought to the job, which to me is a completely different vision from the past, which is using the law as a tool to help our fellow Virginians, especially those who are vulnerable, those who are discriminated against, people who really need the arm and shield of the law to help and protect them. And it has shaped my view of what the law is all about, and an important philosophy that I brought to the job.
So along those lines, when you're talking about, righting wrongs, what are some of the things that you have done in your career, whether as state senator or board of supervisors or attorney general, that you are most proud of accomplishing?
There's a lot there. I think if I had to point to one thing, it is.
Do more than one. If you want to do a couple, you're welcome to do a couple. I'm not trying to pigeonhole you.
But I think this one thing really points to a whole lot of things. To me, what I think I'm most proud of is bringing a different vision for what an attorney general should be all about. I first ran for attorney general 8 years ago because I had seen how the Attorney General at the time, and I also knew historically, had either misused or abused the powers of the office. In my predecessor's case, Ken Cuccinelli, using the powers of the office to marginalize LGBTQ plus Virginians. And so many other things about climate change and other things. And I thought, you know, we need an Attorney General who will put the powers of the office on the side of the people. And that's the new vision that I brought. That's why I ran in the first place 8 years ago. And that's why when I first was sworn in, when just a couple of weeks after taking the oath, I said, no, I'm not going to go into court and defend an unconstitutional ban on marriage equality or a ban on marriage for same-sex couples in Virginia. I'm going to fight for marriage equality. It wasn't popular at the time. And there were legislators who filed bills of impeachment. The state bar had a special prosecutor to try to disbar me, but we won. And it made such a difference in people's lives. And now we have the strongest LGBTQ protections in the entire South. I stood up for new immigrants and made sure Dreamers had an equal education in Virginia. It wasn't popular at the time, but it changed their lives forever in a positive way. I went to Dulles Airport and said, this is wrong, this is un-American, and I went to court and got the country's first preliminary injunction to block it. It meant so much, not just to Virginians who happen to be Muslim, but all minority communities, because it made them feel like, you know, they were a part of the Commonwealth. They may not have recognized what their country was doing, but they felt home in Virginia because of that. I went to the Supreme Court, not once, but twice, to defend the Affordable Care Act. It means to millions of Virginians, you know, hundreds of thousands of Virginians get their health insurance on the health exchange. Hundreds of thousands of Virginians are now covered by Medicaid because of Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. Prescription drug costs are lower. We have protections against pre-existing conditions. All of that would go away if either of those cases had been successful. We're still waiting on the Supreme Court on one of them. But, you know, any one of those cases, or eliminating Virginia's rape kit backlog, that has meant so much to survivors. So any one of those single things you would think ordinarily would rank right up there as a career highlight, and they are. But all of them reflect that new vision that I brought to the job, which is making sure that the powers of the office are on the side of the people. And that, I think, is my greatest accomplishment. And I also think it has changed the expectations that Virginians have now of what their Attorney General should be doing. And so that, I'm hopeful that Virginians will never accept an Attorney General who uses the powers of the office to limit people's rights, to oppose them. I mean, look, historically, the Attorney General at that time fought Barbara Johns back in 1951 at age 16 when she led a walkout of her segregated and dilapidated Moton school. The Attorney General at that time fought her all the way to the Supreme Court, thankfully lost. The Attorney General at the time fought the Lovings all the way to the Supreme Court because of their race and their marriage. Attorneys General fought gender equality in higher education, and I've talked about my predecessors, some of his actions. And so, I'm hopeful that now the expectations that Virginia has for their Attorney General is, now we want an Attorney General who will stand with the people, who will help protect and expand their rights, and we want to continue that progress.
So we talked about things that you are most proud of. What are some of the things that have been the most challenging parts of your career, whether as Attorney General or whatever? So, or challenging parts of things that you have struggled with or been frustrated with?
There are always frustrations. I think, I'll say, probably one of the challenging things I remember back when I was in the Senate, State Senate, and I love being in the Senate too, but like I said, this job is just amazing because of the ability to help so many people. But I remember in the Senate, one of the things I love about it is sort of cuts both ways. I really love the notion of a citizen legislature. You go down to Richmond for 45 days or 60 days, you do the people's business, and then you go back home to your families, your jobs, and live under the laws that you make everybody else live under, right? But it's tough to balance all of that because you've got the pull of needing to spend time with your family, you need to spend time at work, and then you have your responsibility. It's just always hard to keep all of those, keep the right balance. It was just always a little tough. And in this capacity, this is a full-time job, and I can just pour all of my time and attention out to thinking about how I can use the law to help my fellow Virginians. And that's a great thing to be able to do.
So let's say we fast forward, 4.5 years from now, and your third term, is considered wildly successful. What does that mean? How would you define success in the next 4 years? What would that look like if you were reflecting back?
Well, I think, just kind of looking forward in terms of things that I'd like to get accomplished. First of all, I want to continue to bring that same philosophy that I talked about, making sure the powers of the office are on the side of the people. But, in a more concrete way, I'm looking at how we could do more on racial justice and policing reform. We're making some progress, but there's a lot more to do. We just got pattern and practice investigation authority for unconstitutional policing, systematic unconstitutional policing. And we used to be able to count on the U.S. Department of Justice to do that. Following the horrific Rodney King beating, Congress authorized the Department of Justice to do those pattern and practice investigations. They used to they've done a lot of good work. Under the now previous Trump administration, they just stopped doing it. And so last year when the General Assembly was meeting, I asked for authority for our office to be able to do them in Virginia, and got that authority. It's becoming effective, and we're beginning to put a team together to be prepared for when complaints come in of systemic unconstitutional policing. And so I know that will happen, and we want to be able to do those effectively. It'll also be really nice to have a partner in the Department of Justice, which I'm certain under Merrick Garland we will have. Some other things, I want to see that our efforts on decriminalizing and actually legalizing marijuana are done successfully. 2 years ago, nobody was talking about even decriminalization. It just really wasn't going anywhere. And to the extent people were talking about it, it was, well, Virginia's not really ready for this. And I could see in my position that criminalizing possession of small amounts of marijuana was one of the major on-ramps for Black men in America and Virginia into prisons and jails, and that had to stop. And so, I came out strongly and said, we need to make this a priority. It is saddling too many Virginians, especially people of color, with convictions unnecessarily. And thankfully, that picked up momentum. We started having summits. We're getting closer to legalization, but we can't let up until it is done and done right. We also want to, I just completed the first ever investigation into allegations of systemic racism in a Virginia school system, Loudoun County Public Schools. And that was an 18-month-long effort, but it has resulted in real accountability and oversight, and I think offers the likelihood of real positive change. And there will need to be others. I hope that other school divisions around the state take note that we're watching and make changes on their own, but if not, we'll need to do more of those. So that's one area I think that I would like to look back on and see real progress on. Another one is in health, safety, and wellness. In this week in particular, as we reflect back over the trauma of the last year of the pandemic, the magnitude of the loss that so many families have faced and confronted. And also coupled with the hope that President Biden gave us last night in his national address, that, you know, the light at the end of the tunnel seems to be getting closer. A lot of work will have to be done and recover from it. I'm proud of the work that I've done to help our guide our Commonwealth through this part of it so far, but there's going to be a lot more to be done. We need to do more on gun safety. And one area that I want to expand is something that we're doing on sexual and domestic violence. I started on a voluntary basis working with local communities on what are called lethality assessment protocols, which is really connecting going through a set of questions to determine whether the victim of sexual domestic violence is at risk of further victimization. And if so, have that first responder connect them with services right away to reduce the likelihood of further victimization. That's on a voluntary basis. It's been working really well. I'd really like to see that expanded throughout Virginia. And then sort of the last third bucket would be on workers' rights. And I just created a new worker protection unit to address the problems of worker exploitation, misclassification, wage theft. And so there's a lot more work to do. So, you know, in a concrete way, those are some of the things that I'm looking forward to if I'm privileged enough to be able to have a third term.
So we talk about things we're looking forward to. This is not a political question. What do you look forward to post-COVID? What do you like to do for fun that you miss? I mean, everybody misses seeing their family and friends, but what do you like to do for fun that you have not been able to do that you look forward to doing?
Well, I'll say actually, it's something that I do for fun that I actually have been able to do. So, you know, growing up, like I said, it was a rural area. We had a huge garden, huge vegetable garden. I spent so much time, spring, summer, fall, gardening. My mom taught me how to preserve food, so I still use my grandmother's pickle recipes. So, you know, anything we grow, I know how to preserve it. And so I had a garden as an adult. And then once I got into public service, you know, I thought, well, I'm not gonna have time to do this anymore. And I really missed it. So I started gardening again a couple years ago. And that's just something that I'm passionate about. Laura and I have a garden in the backyard, got some young fruit trees. And to me, it's a connection to the days of my youth, reminds me of my mom and my family. It's kind of a connection to humanity because we've been growing our food for tens of thousands of years. And it's just really nice. And what I was able to do a little bit more because of the pandemic, I would get up super early in the morning. I was an early riser. And so I'd get up at like 5, make a pot of coffee, a little bit of breakfast, and, you know, go out around 5:30 in the morning and just walk through the garden, seeing the blossoms starting to open up, see the bumblebees kind of flying around and putting in an hour or so of work before the day got started. That's something that I just really enjoy and am passionate about. And back on the pickling, so little known secret, I think I have the best pickled okra recipe on the face of the planet. There are two kinds of people in this world, those who like okra and those who don't. You can tell I'm one who does. But Sean Brock, who's a native of Southwest Virginia and a great chef, I found his pickled okra recipe. It is the best. If anybody wants it, I'm sure he wouldn't mind me sharing it.
Mark Warner did a tuna melt sandwich for us live. I'm pretty sure you're going to need to do a cooking video live of your pickled okra recipe coming up.
We'll see about that. Maybe I'll show you a before and after.
So, we're Delegate Jones will be coming on in a second, but what makes you different from other candidates? If there's one parting thing that people would want to take from you about when they're trying to decide who to vote for, what makes you different?
I guess it's probably, the life experiences that I talked about, having seen the experiences over a period of years where it seems like almost everybody needs the law at some point. And so I think that passion that I got from my mother, desire to fix problems that I see around me to help my fellow Virginians to figure out, and the skill set that I have is that I'm a lawyer. And so, thinking about how I can use the law to help others, it's just a philosophy that's been ingrained in me, and it's a part of my my public service, especially as Attorney General.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was really a pleasure getting to know you and learning more about your farm. I can't wait to hear more about your garden coming in this spring. I'm pretty sure you're going to take us on a virtual tour of your garden this spring.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't qualify as a farm now. So, we live in town, but it's a pretty big backyard, and I would be happy to do a virtual tour of it once we have something to plant. Hopefully by April.
I'm a gardener want to be, and I just don't weed very much, so that doesn't really do so much. But well, thank you so much for your time, Attorney General, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Well, thanks, Rebecca. It's great to see you, and to everybody in the DemBiz group. It's great to be with you again.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right. Bye.
All right, everyone. I'm going to let in. We have Delegate Jay Jones coming in. Let's see. Do we have you here? Do we have Delegate Jay Jones? There you are. Hi.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear and see me okay?
I can. Can you hear and see me okay?
I can hear and see you as well.
Great.
Good morning. So we are live, so everybody can see us. So we have about 50 attendees here, or 50 computers as it is. So my name is Rebecca Geller, and I am a business owner. I'm a lawyer in Northern Virginia. I run a law firm. And so we have just finished 30 minutes with Attorney General Mark Herring, and now we're going to spend 30 minutes speaking with you. And to give you a heads up of kind of how this will be run. So I will be asking the questions. Don't need to worry about monitoring the chat. To our panel, to our attendees, you all are welcome to ask questions that I can ask. But as you saw in our last 30 minutes, the purpose of today's conversation is not necessarily to get into the weeds about policy. We want to get to know who you are as an individual, what makes you you, what makes you tick, and kind of your background. So trying to understand who is Jay Jones, and we just do the same thing with Mark Herring. So I'll just briefly introduce you. I think most people know who you are, but Jay Jones is a state delegate. He was elected in 2017. He is from Norfolk, and he comes from a long line of public servants. His parents have both been involved with politics and judges, and comes from a long line of public servants. And he is now running for the Attorney General in the Democratic primary. Jay, the first question I have for you is, what made you decide to go into politics? Is it something you always thought about, or was there a time in your life that made you decide this is something that you wanted to do for your career?
Well, look, first, let me say good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with you guys in this manner, in this sort of candid forum. I wish that we were in person, but I do think that the light is getting bigger at the end of the tunnel. So hopefully the next time we do this, we will be in person. And so thank you, Rebecca, for doing this, for being here, and for chatting with me. I hope that we get to have a nice little conversation. But to answer your question, no, I didn't always want to do this. This is not something that I woke up as a child saying, yes, I need to be in public service, or I want to be a state delegate, or I'd like to be Attorney General of Virginia. My father was in the House of Delegates for 15 years. And so I definitely spent some time around the legislature and had a decent idea of what that was, but certainly really wanted to cut my own path and do what made me happy, and then how I thought I could best deploy my talents. And so, as some folks may know on this chat, I'm really fortunate. I can trace my lineage back 5 generations on each side to slaves in the American South, including in Virginia. And so I often wonder what they would think about their descendant having the opportunity to be the first Black Attorney General of Virginia. But as a kid, I wanted to play in the NBA. I played basketball, I played soccer. And then when you realize that you're not as good as you think you are, you've got to figure it out. So I went to William and Mary, and had a great time in Williamsburg. Then went to work in New York City in finance for a couple of years, and then came back to law school. And I've been a practicing trial attorney. It wasn't like that was part of a path. Life is a lot about timing. I think it's mostly about timing. And so, the timing for me just dictated that that's where we ended up. And so I'm really happy with where I've landed. It's been a great ride. But certainly when I grew up, this was not where I envisioned myself speaking to you on Zoom about who I am and possibly becoming the next Attorney General of Virginia.
So you're talking about your career. I'd love to learn more about kind of any jobs that you may have had, whether as a kid or in college, or, what kinds of jobs did you have and what did you learn from them? I mean, not necessarily as a lawyer, but before then.
Yeah, when I was in high school, I was a lifeguard for 3 or 4 summers with my friends at the community pool, which was an incredible experience because you get to spend a little time in the sun, but you also learn about what it's like to be a member of the workforce. I got paid $6 an hour to do that. So certainly understand what it's like when your wages are a little bit low, but when you're 15 years old, that's all the money in the world, right, to go buy Wendy's or Taco Bell or whatever it is that you're going to get. But that was a really interesting experience. And those lessons, I sort of carry those with me each and every day. When I was in college in the summers, I worked in the circuit court clerk's office in Norfolk because my parents said, well, you've got to do something. You can't be a lifeguard for your entire life. And so that was my first real office experience, working with George Schaefer, who was the circuit court clerk there. And it wasn't really the most glamorous job in the world. And I tell George this even to this day, because we're still very good friends. I spent my summer scanning files, old case files into the system so that now, and it's actually very beneficial during COVID, our case files are all digital in Norfolk. And so that was sort of my summer experience. And then, got a job after college and went from there. But, those jobs, which again, I got paid $6 an hour as a lifeguard, and I think $9 an hour to file papers for a couple of summers, teach you about hard work and teach you about getting up every day, going into an office, putting in an honest day's work, and then coming home. And I remember, my friends would be home for the summer and they'd say, well, let's go out and go to dinner, go do this, do that. I said, I'm really tired because I got to get up and go to work in the morning. And some of them didn't necessarily have to do that, or they had jobs that allowed them to work in the afternoon and evening. So, those jobs were important, but it's really the people, right? I'm still very close with folks who I worked with as lifeguards and very close to folks I work with in the clerk's office, some of whom have now become attorneys themselves, some of whom work at other law firms, some of whom who work in business. And it's those relationships, I think even more so than the job, that I value from my time, as a young man and even into adulthood.
I was laughing listening to the lifeguard story because I have 3 kids in elementary school, and my 11-year-old right now wants to be a lawyer during the cold months and a lifeguard in the summer. And
well, let me talk to them, and I can maybe steer them in the right direction.
I know sometimes lifeguard sounds more fun than being a lawyer, but
well, look, I'll tell you, and again, it was a great job, but we had to get up really early to be there like 6 o'clock in the morning, and you had to clean the tiles on the side of the pool and vacuum the pool and put the lanes down, and because you had laps in the morning, and then folks would come in. It's a great job, and it really does teach you sort of the grind, and I appreciate that. And I don't know if I could do it these days, but certainly your children, it's something I would encourage them to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you're thinking about your upbringing, obviously your parents had a big influence on you. Are there any other people, you can talk about your parents or other people, but I'd love to learn more about some of the role models that you had in your life. Who were some of the big influences and how did they influence you?
Yeah, look, certainly my grandfather, Hillary H. Jones Jr., I actually never met him, but he was born in Norfolk just like me. He left for college and law school. His collegiate studies were interrupted by World War II. He went and served in a segregated unit in Italy and came back, and all of his friends had graduated. And so that's when he met my grandmother, who was a freshman when he left and was a senior when he came back. They met at Virginia State University. And so without that U school, I would not exist. But then he went to law school in the North because back then Black folks couldn't get a legal education here in Virginia. But he came back to Norfolk, and he got very involved in the civil rights movement. He had my dad and my uncle integrate a school in Norfolk in 1960 when they were 6 and 10 years old, which I still can't believe that they had to go through that. And they talk about it, but again, I couldn't imagine being a child having to go through that experience. But it's something that they carry to this day. But my grandfather was on the school board, and he was on the State Board of Education, the first Black person to do that. And everybody says that had he not passed away at the age of 52, he had a heart attack, sudden and unexpected, that he might have been the first Black judge in the city of Norfolk. So his example, his legacy is something that I carry with me each and every day. And although I never met him, I hope that he is looking down, and I hope he is proud of the things that my dad, my uncles, my cousins and I have been able to do to sort of continue to push the causes that he was fighting for, 60 or 70 years ago. I also am really fortunate to have a very strong sort of familial presence around me. My mother is probably one of my biggest and greatest role models. She sacrificed so much for me. She was a working mother. She was a prosecutor when I was a kid, then became a defense attorney, then went back to prosecuting when I was in high school. And oftentimes, because my father was in politics, he was gone a lot. And so it was just me and mom. And to see her sacrifice to get me to soccer practice, to make sure that dinner was cooked and was on the table, it took a lot. And so, I really have a great deal of admiration and respect for her and the things that she did for our family and for me. So she's obviously another one as well. But I've been able to have some great mentors along the way in my professional capacities as well. I'm so fortunate. Some folks who are attorneys know Pete Decker was a legendary presence here in Norfolk, and he offered me some mentorship back when I was in college and sort of early on in law school before he passed away. And then folks like Ken Melvin and Dickie Cranwell and Ward Armstrong, who were friends of my father, who have sort of taken me under their wing and give me a lot of unsolicited advice, oftentimes about what we're doing well, what we're not doing well. But I'm really lucky to have those folks to continue to push me, right, to push us in the right direction, to get me to understand that there's more that going on than just what you see. I think a lot of times unfortunately, as humans, it's not our fault, right? We see what's right in front of us. We're very myopic. We see what's important to us, our children, our families. Do they go to a good school? Do we have a job that pays us enough money? Can we get to and from our job on a transit system that works, right? That we're not sitting in traffic, that we have multimodal transportation opportunities. Those are the things that folks care about. And they don't oftentimes sort of take a step back and see the whole board. And I'm a victim of that as well. And so having those diverse folks and those different sort of perspectives has really helped me. And it's helped nurture me over the course of my career. And I've been really grateful for that.
I love listening to you talk about your grandfather. Sounds like an incredible person. I am the grandchild of Holocaust survivors. So my grandparents had a tremendous influence on thinking about what they would have thought about me now.
Absolutely. It makes me tear up a little bit. And again, I still have people who come up to me today who said, your grandfather helped me get by my house, right? He was the lawyer who did the transaction, or he kept one of my family members out of jail. And these are elderly folk. And they said, you would never know who I am, but he always made me feel seen. And that sort of mantra always sort of guides me, especially in politics, because we are conduits of the people, and people are supposed to be able to come to us to share their issues, their concerns, their passions, their energy. And so you just try to, put people first in every sense of the way.
I love hearing about your grandfather. Sounds like an incredible person. So, you're talking about some of the things that your grandfather has done, and I'd love to learn more about in your career, whether as a state delegate or as an attorney. What are some of the things in your career that you are most proud of having accomplished?
Look, I'm really proud of the fact that before I was in politics, we had some deep community involvement in Norfolk. I was on the board of the Boys and Girls Club. I firmly believe that programs like B&G and the YMCA and those after school entities are really what's going to help us, not just before COVID, but after, in terms of bridging that gap that we've seen over the last year. So that was really great. And unfortunately, I'm less involved now because my time is devoted to other things. But certainly that's been one of the biggest, sort of proudest things that I've been able to do. But I think as a legislator, we have an incredible impact on policy, an incredible impact on people's lives. And it's never lost on me that when I vote, right, I represent about 80,000 people, but everything I do is going to impact 8.5 million people and growing. And so that's really important. And so the things that we've been able to do over the last 4 years, Medicaid expansion, almost 500,000 people now have access to healthcare in Virginia. And that's an incredible feat. After almost a decade of pushing to get there, we were finally able to achieve that. And that's something, probably the most consequential vote that I've taken as a legislator, to be quite frank with you, and something that I'll sort of remember forever. But even sort of, I think on a more granular and sort of nerdy level, I was the chief co-patron on the transportation omnibus bill last year. The speaker carried it, but I was responsible for managing it in committee and on the floor. And so I feel like we talked about that a lot, but that was an incredible piece of legislation that's going to transform our transportation system here in Virginia for a long time, in terms of investing money into 95, investing money into rail, making our roadways safer. That is huge. And it's one of those things that it's not, again, the headline grabber, but it's going to have a long-term impact for this Commonwealth for the better. And so I think there's issues like that I sort of take a lot away from, in terms of, okay, when I'm gone from the House of Delegates, there will be things that will live on forever. And I was able to be a part of that. And that's really, really cool. Because it's never lost on me that when I set foot on the floor, when I'm in the Capitol, in any capacity, 400 years, right? When this democracy started, people didn't contemplate that folks who look like me would be able to be in those seats or have the opportunity to run for attorney general. And so I sort of think about that in this long arc of history, because we're just specks on this long arc, but we all have our own role to play, and we all make these really special moments. And so we've done, again, so much in the last couple of years, and there is a lot to be proud of. I could sit here and list them all, and I think we could get into the weeds on all of these things, but I'd say the last 3 or 4 years in Virginia have been tremendously successful and incredibly consequential, and we've set ourselves up for long-term success. And I think, it's really easy for us as legislators to think for the short term, because we have elections every other year. And so we want to carry those things back to our folks to get reelected. And it's really difficult sometimes for all of us to say, well, this might not be particularly popular right now, but in 5 years, 10 years, 20, 50 years, if we do this now, Virginia is going to be in a really, really great position. And I think you talk about that, we have to talk about the Clean Economy Act, right? And was that perfect? No. But it put us on a trajectory where we're going to be a leader in clean and alternative energy sources, right? Not just in Virginia, but across the country. And that prospect really sets us up to diversify our economy, which in the state we know is heavily dependent on the federal government. Whether you're in Northern Virginia or you're in Hampton Roads, we've got to find ways to sort of diversify our streams. And that, to me, was one of those opportunities that we couldn't pass up. So offshore wind in Hampton Roads, solar across the state, which has been a big passion of mine as a legislator. So, things like that are going to have these long-term impacts. Those are the things that I'm most proud of.
I agree with you about the solar panels. I have solar panels all over my roof, and I love them. They're
Bravo.
Yesterday, I was actually at a very, very sunny day here, and I was on my app watching to see how much energy we were creating from our solar panels with our first big sunny day.
That's incredible. I mean, and again, we are trying, and I've been pushing so hard at the legislative level, and will continue to do so as Attorney General, to be able to create market for solar where everybody can get involved, because that's going to help us all, right? That's going to be a benefit to Virginia, on a wide scale. And we talk about diversifying other areas of the state, right? I think that solar is a huge opportunity for South Side and Southwest. And that's why I had a bill a couple of years ago that made it easier to convert these brownfield sites into solar sites, because I do think that this is going to be a key for us. And so it's something that I wasn't necessarily super passionate about when I got to the legislature, but once you see behind the curtain, I was like, yes, this is a place where we can really have some lasting impact.
So when you're talking about kind of seeing behind the curtain, what if, you obviously grew up in a political family, but are there things that you have seen in the state legislature that have surprised you that you didn't expect?
Yes. And it's an interesting you say that, because I think everyone assumes that because my father was in the legislature and my mother was an attorney, that we were this super political family. Very rarely did we talk about this at home. I mean, almost never, because I think my mom was like, we need to keep this child normal, right? We don't want him to be this, super politico. And unfortunately, it kind of ended up happening. But, I think once you're there, right, it's one thing to be the child of the legislator. And then I was a page and I was an intern when I was in college and law school with first Algie Howe and then Paula Miller. And, you see different perspectives at each juncture, but now as a legislator, you see that not everything is so black and white. I think what everybody will assume, because of what they see on social media, because of what you see on TV, is that, everything is an either or proposition, right? There is no alternative. And so some of these votes that we're taking are really hard. And you've got to understand the motivations of every single person. I can't get a bill passed in the legislature if I don't find 50 other people who are going to believe in what we're trying to do, and 21 down the hall, which is one of the harder propositions that I've ever had to go through, because they are special people in the Senate. And you've got to understand what motivates folks. And so I have always sort of really tried to get to know my colleagues who aren't necessarily from Hampton Roads, who aren't necessarily of my same political party. And to understand what makes them tick and how we can find common ground. I'm really proud of the fact that a couple of years ago, in December of 2019, so right before COVID became a thing, I co-authored an op-ed with Senator Todd Pillion, who is a Republican from Abingdon, Virginia, right? We're as far apart as we could be geographically, but we are very good friends. And I appreciate Todd's service. And the op-ed was talking about school funding, because although our people might look different, My district right now is a majority minority district. I represent every low-income housing community in the city of Norfolk. And although our people might look different, our problems are the same. We have crumbling schools. We need more teachers, right? We have healthcare issues. And so we said, look, the urban and the rural areas have more in common than they think. And we need to sort of think through that, because I think from a long-term, perspective, those are going to be key areas for us to really think about and invest in. And it's moments like that where you see everybody, whether you agree or disagree, comes to public service earnestly and honestly, and they want to represent their community well. And so it might not always be that straight line to get to the solution that you're looking for. You might take a couple steps forward and a couple steps back, and you might zig and you might zag, but there's always room for compromise. And there's always someone who probably might not agree with you, but if you sit down and talk to them, if you understand who they are, you can find some common ground. And I'm really proud of the fact that, at least in Virginia, it seems like, although folks might want to say we're really polarized, we're not. Most of the things that we do in the legislature are bipartisan. There's a handful of things that we don't agree on, right, with the other side. But for the most part, I can understand what's happening in the Valley. I can understand what's happening in South Side. And when their legislators say, this is really, really important to us, why would I stand in the way of that? Why would I, give them a whole bunch of grief, as we go through that process? And they do the same thing for me, right? I had a bill a couple of years ago that we believe in Norfolk would have helped deconcentrate poverty. It was a tax incentive for landlords to rent to lower income folks. And there's a tax credit fund that we sort of tapping into. And folks said, well, I don't know if we love that. I said, look, this is really only for Hampton Roads and for Richmond. And this is going to really help us from a development perspective. From strengthening our communities and deconcentrating poverty. And folks said, look, I don't necessarily agree with it, but if it's going to help you and it's going to help your people, we can get down with that. And we understand that. And so those things, and again, it passed in a bipartisan manner, very proud of that. And so those are the things, right? Those are the big lessons that you learn when you're behind the curtain, right? It's not always what you see on TV and on the internet. And so, a lot of us do actually get along. We are friends. And so I think that's probably the biggest secret that folks don't know.
It is refreshing to hear that people do get along.
For the most part. I mean, look, I cannot lie to you and say that everybody, it gets along and it's lovely peach, cream, and wheat. But some folks like in the legislature to like summer camp. It's fun for the first few weeks, and then by the end you're kind of ready to go home, and everybody starts to get a little feisty. But for the most part, I mean, I have a deep amount of respect for all of my colleagues. Public service is not easy, and we sacrifice a lot in terms of our time, our finances, and our families. And my wife is very forgiving of me. My law firm was incredibly sort of flexible with me, even as just a delegate before this campaign for Attorney General. And you really got to rely on a lot of people to make this happen. And so I have the utmost respect for every single person who is involved, who wants to be involved, because it is a huge sacrifice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you're talking about some of the surprising parts, and I have a question that's not necessarily related just to the political part of your career, but your career overall. Sure. It could be personal or professional. I'd love for you to talk about a situation where you had to overcome a challenge or overcome an obstacle. How did you overcome it? And what did you learn from that?
I could say that I could use every example where I'm disagree with my wife, but I'm not going to do that, because I'm learning very quickly that my wife is always right. But I think, a challenge.
You're very wise. As somebody who's been married for almost 17 years, you're very wise.
We are 6 months in. And so we'll put that aside for the moment. But, when I think about professional or personal challenges, I think about when I was trying to go to law school, right? I think everyone will assume that things might come easy to me, and they really don't. And so studying for the LSAT was a labor of love for me, because sometimes my brain just doesn't think that way. And so I was working and then trying to study for that at the same time, and working at a job that was requiring me to be at the desk for 100 something hours a week. And so I really wasn't sleeping, but it was almost like having two jobs at the same time. And I'll be honest with you, I did take that test a couple of times. It wasn't as if, we just flew through that process. And so, I think there are a lot of folks who will agree that, professionally, you've got to continue to push, right? I think that, broadly, it's almost like a Sisyphusian sort of task, right? You feel like you're pushing that rock up the hill, and then you're almost there, you get there, and then if you fall back down, you got to do it all over again. And I think whether it's professional, whether it's personal or political, that is sort of the story of all of us, right? Is that we all continue to push, we all continue to persevere. And, there are definitely times when you say, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. I want to do it, but I don't know if I'm cut out for this. And you want to prove to yourself, right? More than anything, you want to prove to yourself that you can do it. And we were ultimately successful. But I will also point to one of the bills that I carried a couple of years ago, and that was a bill to standardize training for school resource officers across the state. And you would think that would have a pretty, widespread support. And it was touch and go. And we were in the minority, and it's hard to get bills out when you're in the minority. And so I brought this bill into the education subcommittee. Folks weren't necessarily in love with it, and it died 4-4. And they said, but if you can work on it between now and the last committee meeting of the year, we can try to get this thing out. And working with stakeholders, working with Republicans, working with Democrats, we got a bill that we could all sort of get behind, got it through the committee, right, with close support, right, close vote, got it on the floor, defended it on the floor, and then got it out of the House and ended up passing in the Senate. And, it's almost like a Lazarus, bill situation. But that, right, was super fun because it was going to have a big impact, but also long odds. And again, whether you're in the minority or the majority, getting a bill out is not easy, right? Sometimes it might seem easy, but it's not, especially when you have issues where like schools, right, which folks really want to leave to the localities until they don't. And when you talk about standardizing these training measures, folks said, well, we should probably let the localities do it. And we said, no, this will be better for everybody. Just hear us out. And so to work with all of those people involved to get it out, to debate that thing on the floor. It was one of the best sort of, intellectual conversations that I've been a part of on the floor in the legislature. That was a lot of fun.
I totally relate to the challenges of the LSAT in particular. I hated that test.
It's not as easy. I mean, that's a hard thing. Look, and I have every ounce of respect for folks who put themselves up to do that, or the GMAT or whatever it is. I mean, furthering education is obviously really important, but it's not just a simple step.
Well, and the ridiculous part about the LSAT is that there is like zero correlation between how well you do on the LSAT and how well you do in law school or as a lawyer. There's been a lot
right. And then you do that, and then you got to take the bar exam, which also, I think I use maybe 6% of what I learned for the bar exam in my practice as an attorney. And I get it. We're there. We're on the same page.
100%. Gosh, I have my nightmares sometimes that I'm back taking the bar again.
That's right. Right.
So one question I have for you is, let's just say, we fast forward and you have been elected Attorney General and we are 4.5 years into the, towards the end of your term, and your career has been as Attorney General has been wildly successful. How do you define success? What would you be looking back at and saying, this term was successful because of blah, blah, blah?
Well, look, I think when you talk about legacy, and I spoke about this on the floor a couple of weeks ago, we all want to leave a legacy. We all want to have a body of work that, whether people realize it or not, is going to have a long-lasting impact. And so I can't predict the future. I certainly know what I'd like to focus on as Attorney General, whether it's justice reform, energy and the environment, workforce development, and strengthening our workers here in Virginia, in addition to our strong business climate. I certainly hope that we can look back and say we were working for every single Virginian. That's part of the reason why we put out this policy proposal a few weeks ago to have field offices all across the state, because this place is 8.5 million people, growing by the day. It is rapidly diversifying. And as Attorney General, you don't just represent the people who agree with you. You represent people who disagree with you too. And we want to go and we want to make sure that every Virginian knows what this office can do for them. And that requires the AG's office to get out of Richmond a little bit, to go meet people where they are, to roll up their sleeves and understand the issues that are facing Danville and Abingdon and Page County, right, and the Eastern Shore and everywhere in between. And so my hope that when all is said and done, people will say Jay Jones's office, right, because it's not me, right, it's the office of the Attorney General, was there for us and was protecting people, was lifting everybody up, was using the full weight of our resources and our platform to work for every single Virginian. And I think as I've been able to go around in 2019 physically and 2020 virtually and distantly, you have a lot of folks who say, I don't know what this office is here for. I don't know how it can help me. And that burden is on the occupant to go tell people what it's all about. And I hope that, in 4.5 years, people will say that office was there for us. And that office was working for Virginia. And I think everybody on this Zoom, or most people, are pretty proud of the fact that Donald Trump is now gone, right? Joe Biden is president. And we don't have to worry about the next Twitter alert, right? The next New York Times breaking news alert. We can really focus on Virginians, and keep an eye on Washington, because even though they're Democrats who are in control, we can't always just give them a pass, right? We got to hold them accountable, but we can take this office to the people. And I hope that's the legacy that we leave.
I love that. And I also love the reminder that Donald Trump is no longer in office, which is such a sigh of relief for so many of us.
I wake up every day and thank my lucky stars.
For sure. We're going to go a couple minutes more. I have two last questions for you. One is not political at all. Is what do you like to do for fun? And what do you look forward to post-COVID? And obviously all of us look forward to being able to hug and see our family and friends, but what do you look forward to doing that is fun? How do you relax? What's fun?
I run. And, I don't like to run when it's cold. So my wife and I purchased a rowing machine back in like November. So I run and I row now, which is a lot of fun. And I read. I'm currently reading this book called Kennedy and King by Ray Levinson, which is really great. It examines this sort of relationship between President Kennedy and Martin Luther King at the beginning of, early 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement. It's been fascinating. So when I can, I try to, get a chapter or two into that. And then when I sort of look forward to post-COVID, I mean, obviously you talk about seeing your friends, seeing your family. I'm looking forward to traveling, right? I feel like we just can't do that as much. I mean, we do get on the road now. People are starting, I think, to be a little bit more comfortable with that. But I think broadly, right, I'd like to go on a vacation with my wife, right? We got married in September. We were supposed to get married in May. COVID obviously changed that. We were supposed to have more people than we ended up having. We got married with 47 people. I think we still have family members who were a little bit upset with us that they couldn't join us, but we said we couldn't put aunts and uncles who were a little bit older at risk. And so I think getting out just and sort of moving around in a ways that we were sort of accustomed to and you took for granted, I think beforehand. I think that's what I'm probably looking forward to the most. And, certainly would love to see our restaurants get back to the thriving, places that they were and our, sort of establishments all across the state. And I do think that we're on that path. We're on the right trajectory. And I think Governor Northam has done a tremendous job leading during this period. And it's funny because I tell people, anybody who thinks that they know what to do is lying to you, because we've never seen this before. And I think that one of the things that I'm really proud of in Virginia has been our resilience, right? Our ability to sort of withstand these challenges and be resilient and put ourselves in position, not only to be pretty successful during the pandemic and being nimble and adroit in that way, but positioning ourselves for long-term success on the back end. And so I hope that light is getting bigger at the end of the tunnel, that everybody who's watching today, if you haven't gotten vaccinated, please go do so as soon as you're able, because that's what's going to enable us to join each other in person, right? And have breakfast together at some point in the future at a date set to TBD. Absolutely.
And I love what you were saying about travel in particular. For me, it's anything without my children, and them going back to school will be amazing whenever that happens. I have 3.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I think we all took it a little bit for granted, and now we have been forced to stay inside, right? We've been forced to really. It's a test of our relationships. It's a test of our mental strength and our mental health. And I never would have imagined that it would have taken this long to get us to the point where we are, but I give all credit and praise to those who lead, whether it's in the federal government or at the top of our state governments and our localities, because they've really been the focal points and the people who have been sort of doing the work over the last year to get us to this point.
Absolutely. And, we are right at 1 year anniversary of when everything shut down too.
I know it's a little bit weird because my birthday is on Sunday. And so it was literally like on my birthday when things went south. And so my wife says, well, your birthday's ruined for the rest of our lives, because we never not think about that every time we celebrate.
Well, happy early birthday. My last question for you is, in Democratic primary, it's hard for people to distinguish between candidates. Mm-hmm. So not talking about policy, but what makes you you? What makes you different? If there is one takeaway that people leave today and they want to say, this is why I am supporting this candidate, what makes you different that you want people to remember about you?
Well, look, I think in 2021, we have this really unique opportunity. It's the first time in the modern era that every statewide office has been contested on the Democratic side. We've usually had at least one race that's been unopposed for a long, long time. And this is the first time that Virginia is sort of going to the polls post-Biden with this brand new electorate that we've got, right? This rapidly diversifying state. And I think now more than ever, we want people who are going to lead, right? Who are going to be proactive, not reactive, who are going to step up. And I think for me, as we talk about this race and we talk about where we're going, you talk about rising to a moment and meeting a moment. I think Virginia has a chance to do that. And I think my lived experience and my professional experience makes me well suited for this particular moment. As we walk into this new Virginia decade, standing shoulder to shoulder, we have a chance to really figure out who we are, what we value, what we prioritize, what we want to highlight. And I think, this candidacy is historic in a whole bunch of ways, I believe. But I do think that Jay Jones, right, this campaign that we put together is reflective of Virginia and is reflective of the future that we'd like to see. And the future that we can make. And I think that's really important and that's really special. So I hope that people will take that away and say, this is the guy who we'd like to be a part of our next 4 or 8 or however many years. And I hope that I can get everybody's support. It's been a wild ride. I'm really proud of the fact that Governor Northam has endorsed our candidacy. I think he believes in this vision and our energy and our passion, our conviction. And I think over the coming months, as I get to know folks a little bit more, I think they'll really understand where the governor sort of came down on this and where so many folks, whether it's Congresswoman Elaine Luria or 30 plus members of the General Assembly from every part of the state, understand that this is an opportunity for us to really take the ball, run forward, not be timid, and be bold.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Delegate Jay Jones. And we'll go ahead and wrap this up. And I just wanted to share, I saw there was a comment on one of our questions, and I agree with it wholeheartedly, that it feels so great to live in Virginia, where we have such a wealth of strong candidates and a deep bench, and where we as voters have the privilege of choosing among several excellent choices, any of which would serve us well. So it was a pleasure meeting you and having you join us this morning. And to our attendees, thank you all for joining us. This is part of our candidate series as the DemBiz organization strives to make sure all of our members have the opportunity to meet the candidates who are running for our offices this year. So with that, we will go ahead and sign off. So thank you so much for your time today.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.